Distancing Bill. Wednesday, the 10th of June, motion to approve a statutory instrument relating to the draft Court of Appeal Recording and Broadcasting Amendment Order 2020, followed by a motion to approve a statutory instrument relating to the draft Civil Aviation Insurance Amendment EU Exit Regulations 2020, followed by a motion to approve a statutory instrument relating to the draft Water Industry Specified Infrastructure Projects English Undertakers Amendment Regulations 2020, followed by a motion relating to the Adoption and Children Coronavirus Amendment Regulations 2020. Thursday, the 11th of June, remaining stages of the Birmingham Commonwealth Games Bill, Lords. Friday, the 12th of June, the House is not expected to be sitting.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Leader of the House for the business and for finding time for the debate on the adoption and children regulations. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there were two pictures of long queues. One was of us in Parliament, the other was outside a furniture store with better social distancing than we had. When you get to the top of the queue with one, you get a cushion and maybe some meatballs. With us, you might even get infected. I noticed that the Prime Minister and the Minister for the Cabinet Office were not there voting with us all, but the Leader of the Opposition was there. That image of our Parliament is going to live with this government forever. Time-wasting, shambolic, breaking the rules, putting people's lives at risk. I don't know if the Leader of the House has seen the notice around Parliament. It says, avoid crowded areas and don't move around the estate, both of which the Leader has ignored when he switched off the hybrid Parliament. His response to my honourable friend, the member for Brentford, was to talk about the chamber. The honourable member was talking about the 400 of us who were waiting in Westminster Hall, confined in Westminster Hall. Parliament is a local setting where there is a risk of an outbreak. That's the government's own rules. The government is putting the House staff, the doorkeepers, all of us at risk. They are alarmed that one of the government's own ministers has now contracted the disease. And I was here yesterday evening when he was taken ill, and we wish him, the Right Honourable Member for Reading West, well. This is discriminatory towards honourable members. The Leader has disenfranchised honourable members, and quite frankly, it's disgraceful and it's brought Parliament into disrepute. Our position is that a hybrid virtual Parliament and remote voting should continue until at least the R level has reduced and the alert level has gone down. But meanwhile, in the other place, they're actually moving towards a digital voting system. The other big returners this week were the schools. Can I ask the Leader of the House how that's going? Head teachers are saying it was highly variable. A school had to close because 7 teachers had contracted the virus. Could we have a statement next week on what the position is with each of the schools and what the next steps there are from? I saw the Leader chatting with the Secretary of State for Education. Actually, they weren't social distancing, but perhaps he could encourage him to come to the chamber next week. I asked the Leader of the House on Tuesday whether a risk assessment had been undertaken on the effect on BAME staff and their return to work. Has it been done? Because we now have a Public Health England report that seems to be floating from one department to another. The Secretary of State for Health has passed it to the Secretary of State for International Trade like a hot potato. We hear in the urgent question today that it's now the Cabinet Office who will be taking it forward. Our Right Honourable Member, the member for Hodge Hill, is acting like a responsible mayoral candidate and has set up his own inquiry in the West Midlands where there are concerning figures of BAME people who have died. He is not excluding submissions like the government has, so we need an urgent statement on which department has responsibility for this report and the terms of reference. Now, another inquiry was promised by the Prime Minister. On the 26th of Feb, he pledged to this House, in response to my honourable friend, the member for Jarrow, that an independent inquiry into the Horizon IT scandal would be set up. It has left sub-postmasters devastated. They were innocent, and some of them have killed themselves. When will the government release details of the timetable and the scope of the inquiry? I don't know if the Leader of the House has had time to ask about any further inquiries about Nazanin, Kylie and Anousheh. It's Gabriella's 6th birthday. I don't think she's had a single birthday where both her parents have been there. All these innocent families caught up for no reason. Now, I know the leader talks about accountability of the government, and that's what we would like. So why are written questions coming back saying the information you have requested is not assured to the standard required by ONS for publication, as it would be too costly to do so? We are unable to provide it, which is a bit rich when the chair of the UK Statistics Authority has raised concern about the government's own reporting of testing data. They said they appear to contain a substantial number of as yet unpublished results, which was based on statistics for which no citation is available. Can I suggest to the Leader of the House that the honourable members who've contacted me who haven't had results of their written questions, that they write to him directly and he will take it up with the appropriate department? And finally, I want to say to the staff of this House, I'm sorry that the government have put you through the risk on Tuesday, and thank you for all your help and courtesy, doorkeepers and everyone, including clerks who were sitting at the table as we went through and filed past for the votes.
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. May I start by responding to the important question the Right Honourable Lady raises every week about Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. And of course the government continues to be in touch. The consular officials are working, and it is good news that Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe is still on temporary release, but I have no further news to report. But I continue to welcome her regular mention of this distressing case, because it ensures that pressure is kept up, and I will continue to pass on what she says to the Foreign Office so that the governmental systems are ensuring that representation is properly made for a British citizen. The Right Honourable Lady asks about why we were queuing when our constituents were queuing. And I think it's fairly obvious why we were queuing. We were queuing because we have our democratic duty to do. We have a legislative agenda to get through. We made commitments to the British people in December to get bills through Parliament. The Domestic Abuse Bill is a very important one. The Northern Ireland Legacy Bill, another important one. The Fisheries Bill, the Fire Safety Bill. I could go on and on. We have really important legislation to get through, which we committed to the British people to get through. And how many of these bills does the opposition want to abandon? Well, probably all of them, because they're the opposition. And of course it's their job to try and stop us getting our legislation through. But we should also lead by example. Across the country, people are going back to work. And the Right Honourable Lady mentioned schools. How can we look teachers in our constituencies in the eye when we're asking them to go back to work and we're saying that we're not willing to? I think we have to. We have to be back here delivering on the legislative programme, but also us being held to account. It is right. I mean, it's fascinating. The opposition seems so reluctant to hold the government to account, but it is right that we should be held to account, and that is done effectively by being in this chamber. And it is important that whilst we are here, we follow the social distancing rules. Just looking around this chamber and through the whole palace, there are marks across the palace saying the distance people should keep. And in Westminster Hall, it was made remarkably easy because the size of the flagstones was large enough to meet the requirements. And certainly I was standing at a safe distance from people, and most members were standing at a safe distance, and it was marked out for them to do so. As regards people who cannot attend the House, they will be able to be facilitated. It was a motion we put down yesterday that, as it happens, was blocked by a Labour member that would have facilitated remote appearances by people who on medical advice couldn't appear. As it happens, we took the definition of who could appear from an amendment put down by the opposition, and then the opposition blocks it. Let's hope we have a little bit more success later on today, but we are obviously willing to discuss who should be able to be in those categories to try and facilitate people who are unable to come. But the government's position is that those who need to go back to work should go back to work, and it is obvious that people in Parliament need to come back to work for for the business of this House to work properly. The honourable gentleman chunters away inaudibly. I'm sure if he tries to catch the Deputy Speaker's eye, he may get a question in, which is the proper way of running this process. People can send in an application. And the honourable gentleman from Rhondda always chunters away, but it's noticeable that it was his chuntering last night that stopped people who had to stay away from appearing remotely. So I hope he is suitably ashamed of himself today, and noticeable that he says one thing and does another. No, it isn't. I certainly haven't accused the honourable gentleman of hypocrisy. I wouldn't dream of doing that. But let me come, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the issue of schools and a statement by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State. He doesn't need any encouragement to come to this House. He is hoping to make a statement early next week. It's obviously important that the House is updated, but it is also really important for our children's futures that they are going back to school. And that, as with us, is the process of normalisation that we are getting underway. With regard to the coronavirus and the BAME community, my honourable friend, the Minister of Equalities, is leading the work on that with Public Health England. And as regards written parliamentary questions, I am taking that up with departments. We are looking at which departments are issuing the most holding replies, and I would make a general point that I would continue to have sympathy with the Department of Health and Social Care, which has been exceptionally busy in leading the response to this crisis. Other departments, I think, have more reason to be fully up to date with their WPQs.
Just to say that I really don't want to take this past 1:30, so please make your points as concise as you can, starting with Sir David Amos.
Will my right honourable friend find time for a debate on the reopening of places of worship? Yesterday we heard the exchanges at Prime Minister's question time, but as we're easing lockdown and will allow social distancing in shops, surely to goodness we can allow social distancing in places of worship, which at this particular time mean even more to so many people.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for raising this question, and I have heard what His Eminence, the Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster, has had to say, and he is a very important figure in this debate, and he has called for places of worship to open, and they do indeed offer a great deal of spiritual succour to many people, and the government is working with the churches to get them reopened as soon as is practicable, but having religious succour is going to be important for those who have faith.
Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Once again, my friend, the Honourable Member for Edinburgh East, has been denied the opportunity to do his job because the government have removed his ability to participate remotely. And much of the drama this week could have been avoided by simply letting this week continue under the hybrid arrangements, and the usual channels could have used the recess period to come to an agreement about the way forward. We understand the government wants to get its business done, but we have a right to hold them to account, and that is being denied to us. So I do hope that there is progress on the motions on the order paper this evening, because too many of Scotland's MPs are being actively excluded by the lack of remote participation. And many, like our shadow leader, are doubly excluded because as spokespeople they speak on behalf of the party as well as their constituents, and currently can do neither. So none of the events, as the shadow leader said this week, have been edifying. None of them help to strengthen the government's precious union, and the leader might want to think about that. And we have still, Mr. Deputy Speaker, been left with more questions than answers. There needs to be one clear definition of who can participate remotely and apply for a proxy vote, and that has to take into account the circumstances not just of the member, but of the household that they live in. And there will need to be answers about how track and trace applies to the House. All of us hope the Business Secretary recovers quickly from his illness, but do members who take ill in the chamber self-isolate in London, or do they return to their constituencies? And does the government have a plan, a continuity plan in place for the operation of the House if, quod avertit Deus, there is another serious outbreak here in Westminster? Much of the business that's been announced for next week actually has little relevance to Scotland, but he can be assured we will use whatever opportunities we can to hold the government to account, and he will need to find time for the Foreign Secretary to make a statement about the government's relationship with the United States of America and what steps it's taking to make sure that tear gas, rubber bullets and riot gear produced in or sold from the UK are not being used to oppress peaceful protesters in the States, which is of huge concern to many constituents. And finally, Mr Speaker, just to echo the thanks to all the staff and support services of the House who are working under immense pressure and difficult circumstances, particularly the chaplains who are providing pastoral support. Father Pat continues to celebrate the Wednesday evening Mass, and yesterday marked the martyrdom of the Ugandan martyrs. Black lives have mattered for a very long time, and it's a legacy we all have to be aware of.
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. May I begin by thanking the honourable gentleman for the support that he has given to us getting our motions through to allow for remote participation for those who for medical reasons can't come, and to allow for proxy voting. I would point out that I indicated to the House on the 20th of May that we would be making facilities available for those who couldn't come to the House to appear remotely, and I mentioned on Tuesday that I was not ruling out proxy voting. So the government has always been willing to listen to what honourable members and right honourable members have to say. Well, if people sometimes listened rather than just heckling, they may actually find out the reality of the situation. The relationship of this country with the United States is always of great importance, and the Foreign Secretary is a regular attender at this House to be questioned on these matters. The Foreign Office questions are later in the month, but it is a matter of continuing interest to the House widely and will always be discussed. I share his view that we should pay tribute to chaplains, and he mentions Black Lives Matter. And I would say that the Holy Father reminded us all yesterday that racism is a sin, and I think that is a very important point to bear in mind, that it is a sin, it is something that is fundamentally wrong and wicked. And he also encouraged us to pray for the soul of Mr Floyd, and I would encourage honourable and right honourable members to do that.
Richard Holden.
Mr Speaker, can the leader tell the House what steps are being taken to ensure that we deliver on our important legislative agenda that we've been tasked to by the British people? And could he also highlight that to make sure that everything possible is being done, particularly to deliver the domestic abuse, Northern Ireland legislation, fisheries and trade and counter-terrorism bills in coming weeks?
Yes, my honourable friend is absolutely right and makes a very important point that we need to deliver our legislative agenda, and that is why we need to be back physically, because we were getting no bill committees, we were getting no statutory instruments committees. The routine work of legislation simply was not taking place with a virtual parliament. We were having the chamber taking place in a limited way, but we had not got to the public bill committees, and we were running way behind on the business that we needed to be attending to. We went down to a third of the time in the virtual system debating public legislation, public bills, that we did in the week before that we had to go away, or earlier in March. And therefore we needed to get back to make sufficient progress with these very important bills.
Ian Mains.
Very grateful, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, I understand that we are due to have some time for Estimates Day debates in early July, so members across the House need to be thinking about submitting applications for the subject matter and the departments that they would want the Estimates Day debates to be about to the Backbench Business Committee by no later than a fortnight tomorrow, Friday the 19th of June. Mr Deputy Speaker, we are reassembled here in this House of Commons this week so that the government can carry forward its legislative programme, but as the leader has pointed out, to hold the government to account. But I do note again with regret on behalf of the committee that the business statement didn't include any backbench business debates next week. So with no backbench time, Mr Deputy Speaker, we are mainly as elected members only able to hold the government to account through debate on subjects of the government's own choosing. So can we have a debate in government time on the way in which our parliamentary agenda is constructed and the need to uphold the spirit of standing orders in regard to the allocation of time for backbench member-generated debates to be able to hold the government to account on subject matter of backbench members' choosing?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for reminding honourable and right honourable members about the estimate day debates and to put in for subjects that they will want to discuss. It is right that members should be able to hold the government to account, which is why we are having the considerable additional time that we achieved by being back physically rather than the virtual parliament, which meant there was significantly less time for debate and for scrutiny. Adjournment debates are now back, so we are beginning to bring things back. Unfortunately, the period when we weren't operating at full capacity has meant that the government's agenda is behind schedule, but I am well aware of the standing orders and I am very keen that backbench business should be facilitated in due course.
Mark Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Following the Prime Minister's positive comments yesterday, will my right honourable friend find time for a government debate on how we can use green, low-carbon industries to help power up our economy in areas like Bolsover and in towns like South Normanton to provide new skilled jobs in the future?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and may I commend my honourable friend for ensuring that his own constituency is properly represented in this way. And it is clear that the UK, along with the rest of the world, is facing considerable economic disruption as a result of the coronavirus, and the government is developing a strategy for an ambitious programme for our economic recovery from the global pandemic. The government is committed to investing in green industries, and I would like to assure my honourable friend that this is one of its highest priorities. I believe it is important to invest in new and sustainable technologies which will help to boost employment, grow our economy and protect the environment in future, and I hope that will particularly be the case in Bolsover.
Gordon Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Would my right honourable friend find time for a debate on the decision by Natural England to object to any proposal that would stop the erosion of cliffs on the Isle of Sheppey? I warned Natural England of the likely consequences if nothing was done to solve the problem, but my pleas for a change of policy fell on deaf ears. Now, their refusal to act has resulted in a family's home crashing into the sea, leaving them with nothing more than the clothes on their backs. In addition, 10 other families have been evacuated because their homes are in danger. They too could lose everything they own. My hope that as a debate on the floor of this House might embarrass Natural England into changing its mind and allow something to be done to help my constituents who feel abandoned by the authorities.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for raising this deeply distressing matter in the House on behalf of his constituents. It is hard to think of anything worse than to have to move out of one's house or to be left just with the clothes that one was wearing at the time because one's house had fallen into the sea, because something had not been done that would have prevented that happening. I therefore share his concerns about the effect of coastal erosion on seaside communities, particularly those in his constituency. I would point out to him that the Environment Secretary will be in the House to take questions on the 25th of June, which I believe will be a useful opportunity to address the matter to the Secretary of State. But he is absolutely right to use the procedures in this House to ensure that quangos are held to account as well as government ministers directly.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I recently had the pleasure of voting while strolling outdoors in the company of the Leader of the House for 43 minutes, whilst he was simultaneously being barracked by his own colleagues for the arrangement that he's put in place for voting. But I'm glad that he has responded to the intervention I made on him on Tuesday with regard to proxy voting. But why won't he simply allow members to self-certify and thus treat them as honourable members? The Prime Minister calls for British common sense, but from the leader we don't get any House of Common Sense.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for raising that point. The precise details of how people get a proxy vote is for agreement between Mr. Speaker and the leaders of the three main parties, so the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition and the Leader of the SNP. That is the provision in the standing orders relating to proxy voting. That is how it's been done for paternity and maternity leave, and what the level of certification would have to be within that. Maternity and paternity leave does require specific certification. Whether that is necessary in this case, the honourable gentleman raises a very valid point.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The social distancing guidelines of 2 metres unfortunately threaten the future viability of pubs, bars and restaurants in my constituency of Newcastle-under-Lyme and indeed across the country. I appreciate they're based on scientific advice, but based on the evidence we've heard on the Science and Technology Committee and also based on international comparisons, it's apparent that there is a gradient of risk, and in my opinion it is for this House to assess the level of risk that is appropriate. So please could we have a debate about the guidelines?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm sure my honourable friend has also seen the report in The Lancet, which went through these issues in considerable detail and was widely reported. And obviously, the government keeps it under review all the measures that it has implemented to continue to reduce the flow of this terrible disease. And we also need to play our part in not making it worse by not allowing us to go back to square one. And so people should currently follow the guidance to stay 6 feet apart. SAGE has been clear that the easing of social distancing has to go slowly, and politicians ultimately have to make decisions, but they need to be advised before they make those decisions.
Mr Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I place on record my association with the Shadow Leader of the House, her concerns about the wisdom of our physical attendance here today. But today is the 30th anniversary of the massacre in Tiananmen Square. So it would be appropriate, Mr Speaker, if the government would mark that by announcing time for a statement or a debate on what the pathway to citizenship for BNO passport holders in Hong Kong is actually going to look like. Just yesterday, we saw quite remarkable statements coming from a senior executive in HSBC and from Standard Chartered Bank itself, apparently supporting the Chinese terror legislation. Goodness only knows what pressure was put on these banks to bring about that quite remarkable step, but it does make it clear that we need to hear sooner rather than later exactly what the government intends here.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for reminding us of the anniversary of Tiananmen Square, though I must confess I had not personally forgotten it. It is a reminder of what communist totalitarian regimes are capable of. And the Prime Minister has made it clear that we will stand behind our duty to the British nationals overseas, the holders of BNO passports, and those who are eligible for them, that they will be entitled to come here for a longer period, and there will be a pathway for citizenship for them. The behaviour of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation is, of course, a matter for that corporation, but it may be that it is more closely aligned to the Chinese government than Her Majesty's government.
Dean Russell.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Could the Leader please tell the House what impact COVID-19 has had on the progress of the government's legislative agenda, and what measures he is taking to ensure the government does deliver on all the manifesto commitments it was elected to deliver just 6 months ago? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. As I said, during virtual proceedings we were not able to have any public bill committees or any secondary legislation committees, and that has meant that there has become a blockage in our legislative agenda, and we were running at about 1/3 of the time available for our bills to go through the procedures they need to go through. And these bills are really important. They affect people's lives. The Domestic Abuse Bill, the Northern Ireland Legacies Bill, the Fire Safety Bill, the Trade Bill, a whole number of bills that deliver on the promises we gave to the British people. And that's why we have to be back here, to make sure that we as politicians do what we said we would do.
Jim Shannon.
Mr Deputy Speaker, will the Leader of the House agree to agree to make a statement or call a debate on honouring those who have returned to service in the NHS, those who have retired, doctors, nurses, care assistants, pharmacists, occupational therapists, lab technicians, and every other essential area? Every one of us here knows ones who did that, to wade into this battle when by rights they could have stated they had paid their dues and were retired. And does the Leader of the House not agree The special note must be made of those who knew what they were to face and who waited in regardless for their own health.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The honourable gentleman is absolutely right to pay tribute to those who, taking a risk for themselves, decided that they would go back to serve on the front line in helping people in ill health and to ensure that as many people as possible could recover who were infected with the coronavirus. He is right to suggest that. He is right to raise it on the floor of the House. I can't promise him time for a specific debate, but it may well be that he can get an adjournment debate to discuss this and bring it to wider attention.
Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could we have a debate to highlight the great work our teachers have been doing across the country during this pandemic? A debate like this would allow me to put on record the thanks of Keith Grammar School pupils past and present for the great work their now former rector James McPherson has done. James has sadly had to retire early due to ill health, and would the Leader of the House join me in thanking James for his service as a former pupil of Keith Grammar School? He has led it incredibly well for the last 8 years, and would we also wish him and his family well for the future?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I very much join my honourable friend in thanking the recently retired rector of Keith Grammar School for his dedication and commitment to educating the children of Moray for many years. School leaders and staff have done a fantastic job preparing to open more widely and welcome more children back, implementing a range of protective measures and reassuring families about how children will be supported. Safety of hard-working staff in schools is absolutely paramount, as it is for the children. Teachers, along with all other essential workers, deserve praise and recognition for their efforts throughout the pandemic. And may I say that we, all of us, every single one of us, remembers a teacher who was influential in our own lives. And may I pay a tribute to my own former headmaster, Sir Eric Anderson, who died recently, who was a wonderful and inspirational schoolmaster.
That's true. Rupa Hutt.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. On the first Thursday that we're not clapping for carers, would the Leader of the House agree with me that all key workers who are keeping our country going, yet dying at a disproportionate rate, shouldn't be exposed to unnecessary risk? And could he schedule a debate in government time on one category of those who can't work from home, unlike MPs, where we've seen we can, and that is transport workers, so that lessons are learned, action is taken, and that the lives of Belly Majinga, ticket officer dead at Victoria Station after being spat at, and Ranjith Chandrapala, bus driver serving Ealing Hospital who died of COVID-19 at Ealing Hospital, have not been in vain.
Oh, Madam Deputy Speaker, may I thank the Honourable Lady for raising that question and for the tribute she pays to transport workers who have carried on throughout the crisis, ensuring that key workers can get to their places of work. They have performed a noble and important service, and they deserve to be recognised. And it is important to remember the number and the variety of people who have kept our country going during this pandemic. I can't promise her time for debate, but her comments are absolutely welcome and the right ones to be making, so I thank her.
Doug Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The ability to work from home and to homeschool has been frustrated for many of my constituents in villages such as Addington by poor broadband speed. Can I ask my right honourable friend to prioritise time to bring forward this government's excellent commitment around delivering gigabit broadband for the hardest to reach areas first?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend raises a crucial matter. While many people up and down the country have managed to work from home successfully thanks to new technology, it is important to remember that many others have faced challenges. The government is committed to delivering nationwide gigabit-capable broadband coverage as soon as possible, and I hope this will be able to assist his constituents and others who have found it difficult to work from home using local broadband. Gigabit-capable coverage now stands at 19%, and we welcome the pickup in build rates from industry over the past year. However, we still have far to go to achieve nationwide coverage. We understand the challenges in achieving this, particularly in the hardest-to-reach areas. As a result, we committed in the budget £5 billion of taxpayers' money to ensure these areas are not left behind. We will continue to take action to remove the barriers to commercial network rollout.
Clive Effort.
Tuesday's voting was chaotic and brought this House into disrepute. The end of the queue was moved from one vote to another, left members wandering around not knowing where to join the end of the queue, and inevitably breaking the social distancing rules. The organisation of this lays at the door of the Leader of the House. He was determined to bring us back, and yet the organisation was chaotic. We need to end this Mogg conga that we have to participate in. We need to move into the real world, allow virtual voting and allow virtual participation in this House. What does it say to our constituents if this House has to lock down again because of the chaotic organisation of the Leader of the House?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what does it say to our constituents that we're too grand to queue?
Julian Lewis. Yes. May we have a statement in government time from about the situation of zoos and wildlife parks, which are desperate to reopen and should not be kept waiting till 4th of July? And is there a possibility that the leader, the shadow leader, and the speaker might come together to decide if there is any way in which we as a House can show solidarity and support for Britain's black community in the shocking aftermath of the slow-motion murder of George Floyd on the streets of our democratic ally, the United States?
I will, if I may, answer the second question first. It was such a shocking scene, and I can only repeat what the Holy Father said, that racism is a sin and murder is a mortal sin, and that anyone seeing those pictures must watch them in horror. It is difficult to change from that subject to talking about zoos, though they are important to the people who run them. I understand the point he has made, and I will ensure it is taken up with my colleagues in government.
Ms. Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This week I heard that BBC Politics North will not be returning before the summer recess and has been given no return date at all, nor will the award-winning current affairs show Inside Out. Regional television news has been performing very strongly during this current pandemic. It's vitally important that communities in the North East and across the country are given a regional voice and that our politicians can be held to account. So can we have a debate in government time on the reduction in these vital services and the future of regional programming?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, Points West, the programme in my constituency in Somerset and the region, is, as I understand it, more watched proportionately than EastEnders, which is an indication of how popular these programmes are and the local service that they provide. David Garmston, who is the local broadcaster in Somerset, is one of the most popular figures around, and it is very important that local television is kept up. However, it is a matter for the BBC as to how it allocates resources, and this may be a subject worth raising at an adjournment debate.
Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Leader of the House and I have more in common than he might want to believe, in that we're both actually quite traditionalists about how this House should operate, and I've missed the cut and thrust of debate. However, he is tin-eared and not following his own government's advice, which is to work at home if possible. And up and down the country, businesses and organisations are making massive compromises and working in different ways. And yet he seems to think it's okay to exclude members of this House from full participation and put our own constituents up and down the country at risk as we all come together from all four corners of the UK and then back out again when we are still at risk from this virus. Will he not reconsider and allow us to continue our good work but do it remotely?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, indeed we may have more in common than most people know. We were at Oxford together and I arrived, and the Honourable Lady was a most distinguished officer of the Oxford Union and somebody I looked up to and continue to look up to as a distinguished figure. I followed in her footsteps and later became an officer of the same Oxford Union myself. However, I would deny the charge of tin-earedness. I think we are in line with what the country is doing. We are coming back to work because we couldn't do it properly not being here. I would ask again, which of the important bills do members of the opposition not want? Do they not want the domestic abuse bill? Do they not want the fire safety bill? Do they not want to stand up for our fishing communities with the fisheries bill? Do they not want the Northern Ireland legacy bill? What is it that they wish to abandon? Which parts of our country do they wish to let down? We must come back because we have a job to do.
Listen. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Leader of the House will be aware that there are certain Brexit myths and untruths currently being peddled by certain sections of the media. Could the Leader please reassure me and the constituents of Ashfield that there will be no extension to the transition period?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for asking this vital question, and I'm sure we can agree ensuring we leave the transition period successfully in full by the end of this year is one of the government and, even more importantly, the British people's highest priorities. An extension to the transition period would be neither in the UK's nor the Europeans' interest. Both parties want and need to conclude a deal this year to complete the transition period. An extension to the transition period would bind us into future EU legislation without us having any say in designing it, but still having to foot the bill for payments to the EU budget. We must be able to design our own rules. It is in our own best interests, without the constraints of EU regulation. So I would like to assure my honourable friend and the people of Ashfield that the government is delivering on this promise. So to quote Margaret Thatcher, will we have an extension? No, no, no.
Toby Perkins. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The people of Chesterfield were incredibly happy when Derbyshire CCG set up a coronavirus testing unit in the car park of the ProAct Stadium in Chesterfield. But weeks after it was set up, the vast majority of people are unable to get a test there from Chesterfield because it's only for key workers, meaning that Chesterfield residents have to travel up to 30 or 40 miles to get a test. Now, I've been attempting to pursue this, but it seems to be a local example of the national failure. There's all this testing capacity that's going home after an hour of every day, and people are unable to get that test. Can we have a debate in government time on the government's entire testing strategy so that people can bring local examples and help the government to really get on top of testing?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The testing strategy has achieved 205,000 tests as of the 30th of May in terms of capacity, and that is important. It's the largest diagnostic testing programme in our history, and from scratch, it has within a number of weeks got to more than 4 million tests having been undertaken. So that is a significant success, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, has driven this personally and has, to my mind, done absolutely brilliantly in managing to force something through that would not have happened, I don't think, without his individual and personal determination. However, the honourable gentleman makes an important point, and this is one of the ways in which I think this House being here is always so useful, because specific constituency examples can be brought to the attention of the House where things can be improved. So I will certainly pass on to my right honourable friend the point the honourable gentleman has made.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Would the Government find time to debate the appropriate mechanisms for connection of the new wave of offshore wind turbines and farms to the national grid, and include consideration of an offshore ring main? This is particularly important to my constituency of North Norfolk, where there are many cable corridors being built across the rural countryside, causing enormous disruption to the residents. And surely it's now high time that the government reviews the current method of connection to the grid.
I'm not sure, Mr Deputy Speaker, whether the current connection was a pun or not, but it was certainly a very good one and important to get... In case that wasn't heard by Hansard, I think it is worth recording for the record. The honourable gentleman for the Ronda said it was a current pun. I think that is very good. At least it wasn't a bath bun. Anyway, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I know that offshore wind farms play a significant role in his constituency, and I would like to assure him that the government wants to foster as successful an offshore wind industry as possible. Thanks to the government's intelligent approach to delivering offshore wind, I'm pleased to say that we have managed to offer significant savings for the consumer while also increasing the supply of green energy. BEIS officials are working together with organisations such as Ofgem and National Grid Electricity Systems Operator to consider an appropriate framework for offshore transmission to support increased ambition for offshore wind. And I recommend my old friend take this matter up at the next business oral questions with BEIS, which will be on the 16th of June.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Leader of the House says that bills cannot progress, but that is not quite accurate. Bills can progress if there was the will to do so. Digital sittings could allow for this to happen in the same way select committees are happening. I'm upstairs in the Finance Bill Committee this afternoon and this morning, and this could easily happen if the measures were put in place to do so. It is a decision by the Leader of the House not to put this forward. So will the Right Honourable Vector explain why he wants to put not just us, but the low-paid catering and cleaning staff of this House and our constituents and anybody else we might meet between here and our own constituencies at risk?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the cleaning staff were coming in anyway. And it is worth remembering that the cleaning staff were coming into this House when we weren't. And I think the idea that others should work when we don't have to is one that I find unimpressive. In relation to bill committees were not established whilst we had a virtual parliament. And I would say on the finance bill at second reading is normally an unlimited debate. And that has been used by opposition parties over the years to debate for many hours, sometimes with great distinction in what they had to say. Sometimes. And that allows proper scrutiny to take place. We did the finance bill in 4 hours with an interruption after 2 hours. That is nothing like the proper level of scrutiny. So both from the opposition's point of view in holding the government to account and from the government's point of view in getting its important bills through, which I've mentioned already, the hybrid parliament was not working.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. A really dry spell has left the Pennine Moors as dry as a tinderbox, and sadly there's been moorland fires in the past few days at Digley Reservoir and Dovestons adjacent to my constituency. I'd just like to put on record my thanks to the firefighters, the mountain rescue teams and all the volunteers that tackled those fires. Now, these moors are not only a beautiful habitat, but they've also captured and stored tons of carbon, so they're also important for our environment. Can we have a debate on having enforceable fire bans to help protect our moorlands, and also consider bans on the sale of disposable barbecues?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's obviously important that members of the public treat our beautiful countryside with respect and care. And it was a great shame to see the news of fires on the moorlands near the Honourable Gentleman's constituency, and he is right to praise the local fire brigade for the way it tackled the blaze. Everyone should follow the countryside code and not light fires or use disposable barbecues, which can be devastating to people, property and habitats. That doesn't mean, however, that we should ban everything, and I'd always be very cautious about having further bans. And we have seen devastating wildfires erupt around the world in recent years, and I'm sure my honourable friend will agree that this shows the importance of taking care of our countryside in the most intelligent and prudent way.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. St Andrews University is the largest employer in my constituency. It's already facing the financial impact of COVID-19 and already experiences an effective cap on Scottish student numbers. Now, on the basis of a funding package available only to English universities, it faces a cap on the number of English students it can admit. A written statement has been published on this matter, but this cap has been applied with no consultation with Scottish universities. Will the Leader of the House agree that the Government should make time available for a debate on this cap, which impacts not only Scottish universities, but other higher educational institutions in the other devolved nations?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady raises an important point about the difficulties that universities across the United Kingdom will be facing. It is an obvious problem with what is happening and with the need temporarily to restrict numbers because of the consequences of the coronavirus. As I said earlier, the Secretary of State for Education will come to the House, hopefully next week, and I'm sure that the Honourable Lady will be able to raise her concerns then.
Saxby. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As we've noticed, being back in the chamber this week, many of us across the House are in desperate need of a trip to the hairdresser. As we begin to look at measures for businesses like those to reopen in July, when can the House expect an update so that hairdressers, hotels and other hospitality businesses can adequately prepare to reopen with social distancing measures in place?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, when I was a child, I remember there being a song, "I'll Be Your Long-Haired Lover from Liverpool." I had never aimed in my whole career to end up looking like the long-haired lover from Liverpool, but I fear I'm heading in that direction. I have never had longer hair, and I'm beginning to wonder whether I oughtn't to ask Nanny if she can't find a pudding bowl and put it on and see if something can be done as an emergency measure. However, seriously, of course Nanny's part of the household. What a daft question. But I am pleased to tell my honourable friend that the government is working with industry representatives to develop safe ways for some industries, such as hairdressers, to reopen at the earliest point. And I think many of us will feel there is a burden lifted from our shoulders when the hairdressers are reopened.
Sadly, Leader, not all of us have a nanny. Maria Eagle.
Liverpool, Mr Deputy Speaker. At the beginning of the COVID crisis, the government instructed local authorities, including Liverpool City Council, to do whatever it takes to facilitate the lockdown, rather than worry about how much it cost to take the measures they were taking. But Liverpool City Council and Knowsley Borough Council have since been allocated only half of the costs they've incurred, despite being one of the hardest hit hotspots in the country. So can we have a debate in government time on why the government have broken this clear promise to the local authorities in my constituency about giving back the full costs of COVID?
Mr Deputy Speaker, the government has spent £3.2 billion of taxpayers' money to help councils. It made a grant payment in May of £1.6 billion as an unring-fenced amount to councils. It's provided a further £600 million to fund infection control in care homes via councils. So the government has provided a lot of taxpayer-funded support for councils across the country and therefore has lived up to its commitment.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I welcome the work that the government is doing at a national level on the track and trace strategy, but there's only so much that phone apps and national call centres run by Deloitte and Serco could do. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the role of local councils, local public health professionals and community groups is also equally important, and that in military terms we need human intelligence as well as signals intelligence to defeat this enemy? And that means boots on the ground. So will he find time for a debate about the relationship between Public Health England and local authorities?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his characteristically wise question, and I agree with him about the important role of the local community in tackling the coronavirus. I hope I can reassure my honourable friend that a huge local and national effort is underway to make sure that our track and trace system is as effective as possible. Our 25,000 contact tracers will be in touch with anyone who tests positive for coronavirus, and they will need to share information about their recent interaction. And I'm encouraged that councils have been producing local outbreak plans to contain outbreaks in their area, and all upper-tier local authorities are producing their plans this month. So I think local and national are working together, but his question is certainly a wise one.
Tamarjeet Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. This week marks 36 years since then Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi ordered her abhorrent attack on the most revered Sikh shrine, the Golden Temple complex in Amritsar. It eventually led, under a media blackout, to the destruction of historic structures, the genocide of the Sikhs, and the burning of the Sikh reference library. And that is why Sikhs can never forget 1984. I'm sure the Leader of the House will agree with me that it's atrocious that many still struggle for justice. But perhaps he can also explain to me that why, despite recent revelations, why and given the huge demand from within the British Sikh community, and given the support of the Labour Party and other opposition parties, why has an independent inquiry into to establish the extent of the Thatcher government's involvement within that attack, why has that inquiry still not been held? And can we have a debate on that as well, please?
Mr Deputy Speaker, it is an important anniversary to remember. The question that he raises about a debate is one I think he could raise on an adjournment debate, but I have every confidence that Margaret Thatcher, one of the greatest leaders this country has ever had, would always have behaved properly.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Like very many members on this side of the House, I greatly welcome the decision for members to return to Parliament to deliver on the government's legislative agenda. And of course, this reflects the way that we are encouraging people across the country to return to work and restart the economy where it is safe to do so. But it is important to bear in mind the particular requirements for those for whom this isn't necessarily feasible, including some disabled people. So I wonder if my right honourable friend could advise me, perhaps by way of a statement, how such adjustments will be made here and how I can help ensure they are made in my constituency of Aylesbury.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I would encourage all members that are able to do so to return to Parliament. The limitations of virtual proceedings have meant the government has not been able to make sufficient progress on its legislative programme, which has had a real-world impact. The Domestic Abuse Bill, the Northern Ireland Legacy Bill, the Counter-Terrorism Bill. Members will agree that these pieces of legislation are of huge importance to the British people. We in Parliament are responsible for passing essential legislation which improves the lives of people from across the United Kingdom. And I recognise that health is a deeply personal matter, and MPs with health concerns will need to make their own decisions about what is appropriate for them. My honourable friend will be aware that the government has tabled motions to allow virtual participation to interrogative sessions for members unable to attend for their personal, medical or public health reasons, and to extend proxy voting to those honourable members. But I am always open and always have been open to listening to any suggestions that honourable and right honourable members have to make.
Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The current Leader of the House is rapidly building a strong claim to the title of the worst holder of the job in living memory. He is supposed to be the voice of the government and the Commons in government, as well as a member of the government, and he's failing dismally at that task. He illegally shut down Parliament. Then he unilaterally abolished the perfectly fair system of electronic voting and hybrid proceedings developed to ensure at least some scrutiny of the government during the pandemic. And Mr Deputy Speaker, his pièce de résistance was the absurd spectacle he created on Tuesday, the coronavirus conga, putting at risk the health of members and staff in this place. The discomfort of the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Reading West last night, perfectly illustrates the risks his arrogance have created for members and staff in this House. So can he show some bravery and make time next week for us to debate his disastrous record and perhaps even call for his resignation?
Oh, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady so overstates that she undervalues, that what she has said is so overcooked, exaggerated. We poor members, we couldn't queue for a little time to do our public duty. How hard was it? It was very amusing reading in the Times how some members were quite incapable of walking in the right direction, but I think that's more their problem than mine.
Thank you. Order. Just to say, I intend to go on to the next business immediately. And then we will have a 5-minute break before we go on to the next business.
And a point of order.
And a point of order.
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
But also that, if necessary, of course, if it is objected to the next business, then we will be counting members in all parts.
We will make America great again.